Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us where you're calling from.
Hi there. My name is Alex, and I am from Omaha, Nebraska. I have a question for the rabbi. My question is regarding Daniel's reaction to Jeremiah's prophecy of a 70-year exile for the Jews in Babylon. Daniel feared that due to their sins, the Jews would have their exile multiplied by 7, turning it into a 490-year exile. He was using the book of Jeremiah and referencing Leviticus 26:18 when he came to this conclusion. My question is, if Daniel had access to the scriptures to come to this conclusion, why didn't he read in Isaiah that Cyrus of Persia would come and destroy the Babylonian Empire? Hope this question makes sense. Thank you very much.
This is a very, very sophisticated question, and it's brilliant. Whoever you are, Hashem bless you with a very, very good mind. I'm going to need to explain it, or people are going to get lost. So Daniel 9 is very famous because Christians use it as an apologetic wherein they claim that the book of Daniel contains a prophecy of 70 weeks, which precisely foretells the date of Jesus' crucifixion. Nothing could be further from the truth. And in fact, this whole notion that Daniel 9 could be used as an apologetic for the date of Jesus' crucifixion was a later invention. In fact, it is for that reason that you will not find that time prediction anywhere in the Christian Bible, anywhere in any first century Christian literature. The first Christians to ever even stumble upon Daniel, and a lot had to be manipulated to get their outcome, is in the 2nd century. Irenaeus uses it and so on. The reason why Paul doesn't quote Daniel 9, the reason why Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John don't quote Daniel 9, when I say don't quote Daniel 9, I mean the calculation of 70 weeks, which is 490 years. I don't mean any part of Daniel 9, is because no one thought you could possibly use it yet. It was a later Christian invention. And every Christian that uses Daniel 9 in order to defend the Christian religion, in order to sustain and bolster the notion that the crucifixion date was foretold in the Jewish scriptures, it requires torturous changing of the text. But they have to answer the question, why didn't Paul think this was significant enough to mention? Paul, after all, his letters are consumed with the crucifixion of Jesus, the death of Jesus. That's all Pauline. Mark would have been very happy to use this. They didn't think of it. No one did. So this is a later invention. However, the question asked by this caller is really very, very insightful. You need to listen very, very carefully to even understand the question. So what is going on in Daniel 9? So what happens is there are a number of times in Tanakh when prophets did not understand what was happening around them and why it was happening. So as it turns out, we are told right at the outset of the 9th chapter of Daniel that Daniel is contemplating prophecies of Jeremiah in the first year of Darius the Mede. Now, if you open a chapter like Daniel 9 and you hear that this is in the first year of Darius the Mede, you might go, all right, in the first year of Darius the Mede. That piece of information allows us to understand the timing, and I'll explain. Listen very carefully. As it turns out, Daniel was contemplating calculations found in Jeremiah. The first one is in Jeremiah 25, verse 12, and the second is in 29, verse 10. Now, these two passages appear very similar, which means they both discuss a 70-year period and essentially a time when Babylon would come to an end. And 29 verse 10 discusses, in fact, the fulfillment of this word of prophecy and that the Jews will return back to their land. Almost any person quickly reading these two passages side by side would conclude that they're essentially speaking of the same thing, the same 70-year period. This is what Daniel did, and this led him to miscalculate the predicament that he was in. What was this predicament? The predicament was very clear. The Babylonian Empire had come to an end. Now that's predicted in Jeremiah 25, verse 12. the context of Jeremiah 25:12. Why is Jeremiah even discussing Babylon? Because Jeremiah was a prophet who lived at the end of the first temple period during the Babylonian Empire, when Babylon had long, Nebuchadnezzar had long seized Jerusalem. The land of Israel, Yerushalayim, was completely a vassal state under Babylon. The Jews were divided in how to deal with this horrible predicament. There were false prophets going around saying, we need to fight the Babylonians, we can regain our independence. And Jeremiah is saying, do not do it for many reasons. God is not on your side. Don't in any way try to fight against Bavel. God will not help you. Don't rebel. And another point in this chapter is, as it turns out, Babylon is done in 70 years. Historians to this day are pressed to explain how the Babylonian Empire could have fallen. I mean, the Babylonian Empire was the world superpower. It would have been inconceivable for Babylon to fall. And it fell in an instant to the Persian Empire, okay, in a blink of an eye. And today, to this day, historians are hard-pressed. There's obviously a limited amount of information from the ancient world, hard-pressed to explain this. Now, Daniel presumed that the destruction of Babylon following 70 years would also be fulfilled with the prophecy that we find in Jeremiah 29:10, and that is the Jewish people would be restored to this place, meaning restored to Israel. Got it? All right. Now, Daniel, one other caveat, begins the calculation of 70 years from when? When do you start counting it? Well, you start counting it when Babylon first subjugated Jerusalem. Remember, when Jeremiah is articulating these prophecies, the first temple had not yet been destroyed. Jeremiah is pleading with the Jews, don't fight back. Don't fight back so that the temple is not destroyed, so there is not a complete destruction, right? When was Jerusalem subjugated by the Babylonians, by Nebuchadnezzar? It didn't happen when it was destroyed. It actually occurred 18 years prior to the destruction of the first temple. Got it? Nebuchadnezzar becomes a king of Babylon, and the Babylonian Empire emerges 19 years prior to the destruction of the first temple. You must know this history or you will not understand this prophecy. Okay? 19 years prior to the destruction of the first temple, the Babylonian Empire, Nebuchadnezzar, emerges. It's the world superpower, like the world had never seen. A year later, Nebuchadnezzar would subjugate Yerushalayim. There would be a series of 3 exiles. It didn't happen in one shot. 18 years later, but it was over the course of time that there were exiles of leaders of the Jewish people until it was ultimately destroyed. Daniel begins his calculation from the time Babylon began and emerged as the world power, and when it subjugated Jerusalem a year later. Therefore, he's starting to count essentially 18 or 19 years prior to the destruction of the first temple. Now, this is very important because when the Babylonian Empire was destroyed, so the Persian Empire did not emerge immediately, but rather there was a Median empire that really only lasted for a few months. Let's say it's roughly the area of about 11 months, not even a year, and then Cyrus emerges. Got it? This is very, very critical because imagine you're Daniel. You have Jeremiah's prophecies in front of you. You presume those are the same 70-year periods. The prophecy of the fall of Babylon, articulated explicitly in Jeremiah 25, verse 12, has happened. Darius the Mede, this is not Darius the Persian. That's later. Darius the Mede is now, he's the king. He's going to pass it on to Cyrus, but he is the king. So, but something didn't happen. What didn't happen? What did not occur? Whereas that was fulfilled, the Babylonian Empire ceased. What was not fulfilled is the Jews are not going back. Nothing's happening. Imagine the empire is destroyed. This is such a tectonic shift in human history. The Babylonian Empire collapses, and the Jews are still here, and no one's going back. Like, why are we still here in Babylon? That event, the fall of the Babylonian Empire, should have occurred simultaneously with the return of the Jews according to Jeremiah's prophecy. This is what's very, very critical. Now, the question is, why didn't Daniel go, we have nothing to worry about? Because this is the person's question. You have nothing to worry about because there's a prophecy in Isaiah 44, verse 28 and 45:1. Treat that chapter break as completely artificial. 44:28 is the last passage of that chapter. 45:1 is a famous passage. Cyrus is called God's Messiah. Mashiach means anointed for God's purpose. And there we are told that Cyrus is going to give the command to rebuild Jerusalem, to build the temple, and for the Jews to return back to the land of Israel. And in fact, Isaiah 45 is going to continue to explain to everyone, do not question why I would use somebody like Cyrus. You don't understand my ways. Okay? So the question is, Daniel had the book of Isaiah in front of him. In fact, the book of Isaiah was written hundreds of years before Daniel, approximately 2 centuries earlier. Isaiah lived during the Assyrian Empire. So why didn't he look at it? There's two obvious reasons. The clear reason is something that the caller mentioned, and that's the reference to Leviticus chapter 26, in specifically verse 18. Leviticus 26 is known as the Teichacha. It's a chapter of blessings and curses. And it's painful. It's not as painful as another chapter in Deuteronomy 28, which is similar, not the same, but that's much more elaborate. But Leviticus 26 tells us about what will happen to the Jewish people if they are not loyal to Hashem and they continue to sin. And the passage says, if despite this you did not heed me, then I will punish you 7 times for your iniquity. I will multiply the punishment 7 times. Now, listen carefully. If the end of the Babylonian Empire would be a 70-year punishment, an exile of 70 years, but it was the empire, not the destruction of the first temple, Daniel is going, oh my gosh, I know what's happened here. Leviticus 26:18, this 7-fold curse has been launched, which means the exile is not going to be 70 years now, but the exile instead is going to be 490 years. Now you understand why the angel Gabriel is going to be dealing with a 490-year period. The correction the angel Gabriel is going to make when he approaches Daniel later on in the chapter in verse 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27, that's how the chapter ends, is when you begin the count of the 490 years, and most importantly, Jeremiah 29, verse 10, which means the return of the Jews, you start counting Lechorvot Yerushalayim, from the destruction of Jerusalem, not from the beginning of the Babylonian Empire. So Daniel is thinking, he has a Torah in front of him. The Torah says that your exile could be, your punishment can be multiplied 7 times. And what proceeds from Daniel 9, verse 3, all the way through 16, 17, is Daniel pleading to God not to allow the curse of Moses to be employed here. He cries and begs HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be his name. He begs him and confesses his sins and the sins of the nation. In fact, we learn many laws of prayer and how to pray from this ecstatic prayer that Daniel conveys to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's such a moving prayer that even Hashem, who sent Gabriel, held him back till when Daniel finished. Daniel was praying with such fervor, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu loved Daniel very much. He was called Chamud, beloved. It's completely unique. Daniel was so beloved by Hashem that Hashem hears such an ecstatic prayer that Hashem, that's why Gabriel, when he first approaches Daniel, He says, from the beginning of your prayer, I was sent forth, but he was held back. Let me just hear the whole thing. It's really, let me tell you something, my friend. You learn Daniel, mama swoon, you fall in love with Hashem. You can lose your mind. So, it's so, mili mal yaseh. Really, if you study and you go deep, 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 you go very, very high, high, high. That's all I could tell you. I could tell you, just there's not an extra word here. So that's, my friends, the reason why Daniel 9 begins in the first year of Darius the Mede. Because Darius the Mede is, let's say, the Medo-Persia Empire, that he comes in right before Cyrus. There is no Cyrus yet. So number one, Daniel is going, it's true that we have a prophecy about Cyrus, but the problem is that we very much may be in a predicament where the punishment, 70 years, has been multiplied by 7, which means 490 years. The second part is not as plain, but Cyrus hadn't emerged yet. Cyrus is a name, a Persian name of leaders. It's not like his name was Cyrus, like your name is Henry. It's just like, kind of like Caesar or Cleopatra. I don't know how many. I think we have nearly 30 people named Cleopatra in history. So Cyrus is a royal name, a Persian royal name. And therefore, it wouldn't have registered. It registers for Cyrus, as you see in the opening passages of the book of Ezra. You know, the book of Ezra begins with Cyrus declaring that God spoke to him and gave him a revelation. And Cyrus had the ability to fulfill that promise because he saw his name there. In fact, why would Cyrus tell the Jews, go back to your land? Why would he say that at all? What happened? I mean, Cyrus wasn't a religious Jew. He wasn't Jewish. He probably was a Zoroastrian. I'm not sure what his religion was. But whatever it is, Cyrus says that the God of the Jews, read Ezra's opening, I have a revelation from God. When did Cyrus become a Navi? He didn't. He had Isaiah's prophecy, Isaiah 45. That's why the people who question the integrity of the entire book of Isaiah are kicking out the legs of history. They can't explain Ezra 1. Let me tell you, my friends, this is music, but you got to put it together. This is just, your mind will never be the same if you absorb all this. So the first reason is he had Leviticus. That tells us I can very much delay it. And the name Cyrus would not have been significant in that it's this Cyrus, because that's a royal name. And therefore, in Daniel's mind, it's not that Daniel would have even known Cyrus, because Cyrus didn't emerge as king. Remember, there's an intermediate period from the time the last Babylonian king is deposed and the Babylonian Empire falls until Cyrus the Great emerges. That's a period of, let's say, 10, 11 months. In that interim period, it's Darius the Mede who stands as leader. So we don't have a Cyrus yet. But Cyrus was a well-known Persian royal name. But for all Daniel knew, he didn't know what was going on. What was Cyrus' position? Which Cyrus? Who would be the one who would emerge? All he had was Leviticus, and what he had, very importantly, is no movement. The words that I will restore you to this place, those are the last words of Jeremiah 29, verse 10, didn't occur. He then puts it together, the word, I'll just say this last piece. The word divarai, my word, when you see the word my word, I know you read these words as though my word is some nice King James Jacobean English kind of fancy schmancy term. It isn't. The word divari, that only appears in Jeremiah 29, verse 10. It does not appear in Jeremiah 25:12. It does not mean my word like in a conventional sophomoric pedestrian sense at all. My word means a word of prophecy. It means my promise. That is why, if you go to Daniel chapter 9, verse 2, it says there to fill the word of Hashem. Why did it use the same exact word, divari, as in Jeremiah Not only that, we're going higher. Open up Ezra chapter 1. If you look this up, if you read Hebrew, you're going to mamish go flying. Mamish, you're flying. If you absorb this, you'll cancel every therapist appointment you're ever going to have in your life, because you're going to feel so secure in your faith in Hashem. If you open up Ezra chapter 1, read just the opening passage. That means Ezra 1:1. Ezra is not introduced in the book of Ezra until chapter 7. Side note. How does it begin? And the first year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, at the completion of the word, devar. There it is. So the word here, devar or divari, that doesn't mean conventional, a word like I said something. It means the promise of prophecy that must be fulfilled. And you can now, we just triangulated. We triangulated from Jeremiah 29, verse 10, to Ezra chapter 1, verse 1, to Daniel 9, verse 2. But what Daniel had a lot to be afraid of because of a miscalculation. It's not that Daniel did not receive prophecy on this. And therefore, there are times, this may surprise you, that there were Nevi'im Nevi'im, the prophets, were the greatest men and women who ever lived. But when they were not in a state of prophecy, when the source of information about the history of the Jewish people and destiny of the Jewish people was not received from God, they were asked questions, and at times what they thought, God had to correct it. There are many examples of this. It's not that the prophets were wrong. They just, if they did not receive their information, Kayamar Hashem, but they did it based on their own calculation of what they thought. So you look at 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse. The prophet thought that David should go build the temple, and told David, go ahead and build it. God came to him and said, stop it. So Daniel thought this, it was logical to him, but essentially I'm unpacking it. The time to begin counting the 490 years, that's 70 for the exile, the Babylonian exile, and 420 for the Second Temple period, total of 490, before a messianic period can even begin, is what is launched, what is conveyed by the angel Gabriel to the prophet Daniel. That, whoever you are who asked that question, you know your stuff, you studied well, and thank you so much for joining us on air.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא ועת נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך